Hello everyone, welcome to the Age Group Triathlon Podcast. My name is Simon Olney, I'm a professional triathlon coach, and in this week's episode I'm wrapping up my 3-part series on how to go from an occasional bike rider to a confident road cyclist. Now, if you haven't listened to the first 2 episodes, I recommend you go back and do so, because there are some points in there which I'll be referencing here. But the main 3 topics that I'm going to be covering today are clothing, which is the kind of clothes that you'd be looking to wear, in different conditions. I'll be looking at the very basics of bike fit, how to get comfortable on the bike, as well as training, how it is that we should actually structure our cycle training. So I've got a lot to cover, but I won't be going into as much detail as I have in certain areas as in previous weeks, because it is broadly less technical. Let's crack straight on and look at clothing. Now, I'm going to hold your hand while I tell you this. I'm going to look into your eyes with compassion and tell you that lycra is inevitable. You can kick, you can scream, you can be in denial that you will never be one of those people who dresses up in lycra because you don't want to look like a reject from the sausage factory. You can claim that you're going to find other ways to, you're going to wear other bits, but the fact of the matter is, it comes to us all. And I was much like you. When I started off cycling, I told myself, because at the time I was just getting around London rather than training specifically for a triathlon. I was just cycle commuting around. I will never wear that skin tight clothing. I don't have the kind of body that can pull that off. Not a chance. So I was riding around in whatever I could get my hands on. You know, some sort of bits of running clothing, just casual clothing, which I still do occasionally. I'll hop on my bike in my shorts, t-shirt and trainers. And I ride on my clipless pedals just with trainers, and I go bombing along and overtake some people who are in full lycra. Because you don't need to dress up for every single ride. But I swore to myself this would never happen. And then my mum, bless her, she bought me some cycling tights from the middle aisle in Lidl, because they occasionally do cycle clothing. These things arrived in the post and I looked at them and I thought, I'm never wearing those. A, it's lycra. B, it's tights. I'm a man. What's she thinking? But then, as I was riding my bike, the weather got colder. I mean, it must have been sort of September, October, the earliest when she sent them over. And I had to ride into Wandsworth. And they've been there for a couple of weeks under my bed. And I thought to myself, my mum's gone out and she's bought them. I should at least try them, shouldn't I? You know, that's quite self-conscious, low in confidence. This isn't, kind of thing that I sort of jump towards. Rode, at night, in the cold, to Wandsworth in my cycling tights. And I was converted in an instant. I suddenly understood. Having something that was so warm and so comfortable that allowed my legs to move so freely. It had the padding which made it really comfortable to sit on the saddle. I was an instant convert. And you can try to, avoid it as much as you like. But if you want to compete in triathlon, you're probably going to be wearing something fairly tight-fitting on the day. You're going to want something comfortable. You're going to want something you don't get too hot in the summer months or that keeps you warm in the winter months. You're not something that doesn't end up absolutely drenched with sweat and sticking to you. And the answer to all of this is cycle-specific clothing. And there's a reason that just about every road cyclist that you see will be wearing lycra, because it's the most comfortable, it is the most efficient, and it is just everything about it is designed to be as comfortable and efficient on the bike as possible. So I'm going to go into this episode. I'm going to start helping you, assuming that, you are very much unconvinced about this. But we're going to talk about all the different types of cycle clothing. Not all of them are skin tight, I should point out. When you might want to consider them, when you might want to use them, and, some of them that are non-negotiables, other which you may not need. First up, we have cycling shorts. Now, cycling shorts, even if you are, one of the 1% who refuses to be seen in lycra, even though you've been cycling for a prolonged period of time, you outright refuse. You know, it's your right to. You can still wear a pair of cycling shorts underneath the clothing that you're wearing. So if you have, say, a pair of running shorts or a pair of cargo shorts or anything like that, you can wear some cycling shorts underneath, so you get the comfort benefits of the cycling shorts, but without being seen to be riding around in Lycra. Now, what's so important about cycling shorts is the chamois pad. And this is a pad of either, it's all sorts of different materials can be put into a chamois. But some of the cheap ones are just sort of a slice of foam. The other ones are a lot more technical with all sorts of materials I can't pretend to understand, if I'm honest. But you put on these cycling shorts and it turns your hard saddle into something that's really quite comfortable to sit on. I think I mentioned this before in the first episode, but you do want to get yourself a harder road saddle with a more comfy pair of shorts. This is the combination that anyone who's serious about riding bikes is going to use. So you really do need to be pushing yourself in this direction. Now, there are two types of cycling shorts. You have bib shorts and you have regular shorts, let's call them. Now, your regular bike shorts, they have a waistband, and that will be what holds them in place, and you'll have your chamois pad. Bib shorts, on the other hand, they don't have a waistband. What they have are two loops, very, very big loops, that run from the front to the back, and these loops, they slip over your shoulders like a pair of braces, and they keep your shorts elevated that way. The benefit to these is that you end up with a lot more in the way of support. They don't tend to shift around as much, they don't tend to move around as much. But sort of most importantly, for me at least, is that you don't have a waistband that's pressing into your stomach. Now, when we are riding long distances, this is the kind of pressure, when you consider the position that you're in when you're riding a bike, having that pressure against that area of your gut, your digestive system there, it's the kind of thing that can turn a pleasant ride into being really quite uncomfortable. Now, just about every cyclist out there who rides long distances is going to wear bibs over waistband shorts. Now, there are a few holdouts, again, as there always are, and that's fair enough. I'm not going to tell them what to do. But one of the reasons that nearly everybody goes for bib shorts is that they are higher quality. Because manufacturers know the vast majority of cyclists are going to be wearing bib shorts, so their better quality pads go into the bib shorts, whereas the waistband shorts are generally for people who are starting out in cycling and they're not quite convinced about going full bib short, and so they go for the waistband instead. When I worked at a bike shop, we must have had, 50 different types of bib short, just in the men's section, just 50 types of bib shorts available, and only one brand, there's one model that had a waistband. That is sort of how it is sort of set up, really. That's how the industry works. Yeah, it can be weird, it can be difficult to get your head around, and I understand that a lot of ladies, they feel slightly uncomfortable about this, because you have to, if you want to use the toilet, then you have to unzip your jersey, and you then have to roll the bibs off of your shoulders before you sit down on the loo. It's not a lot easier for gents either, because often the bib shorts, they'll come up sort of close to your your belly button in many cases to give you a lot of support, and it's not easy to control things in quite the same way. You often have to sort of contort and bend yourself over to get the angle that you need, without wanting to be too graphic. They aren't the most efficient when it comes to using the toilet, and we all know that sometimes when you're out cycling and you get to the toilet, you may only have, a limited time in which to make it there if you've been holding it for a prolonged period. But the comfort, more often than not, it does offset this small inconvenience. And again, this is something, I think that waistband shorts are more common in the women's range. I can't say that I can remember clearly, because we just didn't have as many female cyclists come in, so I was less familiar with that section of the shop. I believe we had 2 or 3, if memory serves, around about kind of a quarter of the ladies' shorts were sort of waistband shorts, as opposed to the bib shorts. But realistically, bib shorts is what I point people in the direction of. But even if you do go for waistband shorts, these are going to be so much more comfortable. It's going to be so much easier. It's going to be so much nicer than going down the route of, oh well, I'll just wear these running shorts. I'll just wear, my summer shorts when I'm out on a ride. Okay, these really, if you're going to invest in one piece of cycling kit, even if you just hide it underneath other shorts, make it some bib shorts. Moving on from the bib shorts, further up the body, we get to cycling jerseys. And your basic cycling jersey is normally short sleeve. It has quite a long back. Because you're going to be bent over, it has a longer back, the way that it's cut, to make sure that the back covers you nicely. You'll have 3 large pockets in the back of most cycle jerseys. And this is where you can stick, well, whatever it is that you want. It could be your pump, it could be snacks, it could be spares, it could be tools, your phone, your keys. These are quite generously sized pockets that allow us to go out and carry the gear that we need with us on a ride. I'm a big fan of these. Now, these cycling jerseys, they aren't all the same. There's not as much variation in them as the bib shorts, where with bib shorts it can take a while to try different bib shorts and find one that really works for you, especially for the ladies. There is a bit more of a trial and error because of the unique anatomy between individuals. But when it comes to cycling jerseys, then you have sort of jerseys which are a bit heavier, which you may sort of use in conditions where they're a bit more changeable. You have climbing jerseys, which are ones that are super ventilated. They might even be quite sort of meshy on the rear panel. You have weatherproof jerseys, which are jerseys which might have a windstopper material. They might repel the water. You also have long sleeve jerseys as well, for those kind of, there's not really much of a market for long sleeve jerseys in my eyes. I'd nearly always rather have a short sleeve jersey and some arm warmers, because I'm going to touch on them in a moment, but the arm warmers you can take on and off as the conditions change, whereas with a long sleeve jersey you're kind of stuck with it. So you do need to sort of do your research a little bit. I recommend going to a bike shop, trying some on, seeing how they fit. Now, whenever you're trying cycling clothing on, it should be pretty skin tight. It may not always be absolutely skin tight, but we want to avoid any large amounts of gappage around our legs or our arms, because this is going to flap around as we ride, and this is going to slow us down, and it's going to be quite frustrating having that there flapping. So again, just, if you've got these 2 jerseys, you're looking at one fits a bit tighter than you'd like, but the other one feels a bit more relaxed and casual, rather than having to come back in a month's time and have to buy that tighter jersey because you didn't have the courage to buy it the first time, just take the plunge and get the slightly tighter one. You will thank me later. Once you've got your cycling shorts and your cycling jersey, you're pretty well set up for riding in the summer months. Now, you may choose to have a base layer, which is a layer that goes underneath your shorts and your jersey. It'll either be short sleeve or sleeveless, and the idea is that this will wick sweat away from your body and ultimately sort of keep you a bit cooler, or in the case of the winter months, or the cooler months at least, it adds another layer of insulation. I quite like riding with a base layer, but again, this is optional. If you are looking to sort of really you go down this route and go, right, okay, I want to get the gear, I want to look the part, I want to feel the part, I'm going to talk about cycling shoes. Now, I've talked about clipless pedals and different systems in the first episode. Again, go back and listen to that one if you haven't already. But looking at the shoes, you're going to have to start with the pedal system that you chose. If you chose SPD, just regular SPD, then you have to look at shoes that use that system. If you chose Speed Play, if you chose a 3-bolt system, that is where you're going to start from. That is going to be your foundation. So if you go to a bike shop, again, I highly recommend, especially with shoes, like clothing, you could get away with ordering it online. Shoes, don't even bother. It's going to be an exercise in frustration. unless you're already replacing a shoe that fit you. We are going to be looking at, so sit down to the sales rep and say, look, I've got a 3-bolt system, I'm looking for these shoes, and sort of just talk about what it is that you're looking to get from the shoes. Because if you say I'm looking for something that's really ventilated, then they're going to suggest certain shoes, whereas if you're looking for something that's just cheap to get you started, then they won't bring you out the expensive shoes to try on. The way that a shoe looks, the aesthetics of it, it's not unimportant. Because when it comes to anything you're going to spend decent money on, you want to look at it and go, yeah, that's nice. I'm glad I have those, rather than, well, these are really ugly, but, I felt they were the best ones for me. Comfort and functionality should always come first, but if you are torn between two shoes, don't be afraid to go for the ones that you like the look of a bit more. But let's look at the basics here. So, the most important thing is the shape of your foot and how that fits the shoe. A lot of cycling shoes, they're quite narrow. And you do want a shoe that's going to hold your foot nicely, but people have naturally wide feet, people have collapsed arches, people who may just, be built differently to other people, maybe they might not look like your average cyclist, they can have wider feet. And this can make it very painful to try and squeeze into a pair of many cycling shoes. So what is it that we can do to get around this? Well, we need to be looking at brands which accommodate wider feet. And I'm going to make an exception to my normal rule here. On my podcast, I don't accept any sponsorship requests that I get through. I want to be able to tell everybody exactly, the truth, what I believe, rather than feel that I have to, have to only mention the brands that paid me and have to lie about how good their stuff is. I'm going to make an exception today. I'm going to mention and recommend a brand. Okay, I'm going to recommend, if you have wide feet and you struggle to find cycling shoes that fit you, look at Lake Cycling. Lake. Lake Cycling shoes. They come up much wider than most brands. Not only that, they have an extra wide in some of their models, which are like boats. Very few people are going to find themselves unable to fit into one of those bad boys. If this is something you struggle with, look at Lake, okay? Great quality shoes. They really are great. We sold a lot of them at the bike shop because so many people came in and they just couldn't fit into the regular shoes. So that's definitely one to have a look at there. The width of the shoe is a major issue. The length of the shoe is another. Because if your toe is touching the end of the shoe, you're going to end up, as your feet swell, as you ride, you get warmer, your feet will swell. It's going to start rubbing the end of the shoe, either your toenail or the toe itself. And this is going to make for an incredibly unappealing experience. Meanwhile, if you go for a shoe that is too big, if you have too much space in the toe box at the end of the shoe, then you can end up with your toenail suffering damage, maybe even sort of turning black and falling off, because every time that you pedal, there's a good chance that your toe is going to hit the top of the shoe, that your foot is going to start sliding around inside that shoe. That's not what we're looking for. The other part of this is the heel cup. Now, certain shoes, such as actually, I'm not going to mention brands. Certain shoe manufacturers, they have quite a narrow heel cup, which holds your heel into position. That's the idea, at least. But unless you have quite a narrow heel, unless your heel matches the shape of that, it can get quite pinching and place load on the Achilles tendon. So for people who are looking for performance, whose feet fit those, brilliant. They can work really well. A lot of other people, they're going to want to look for a more traditional shoe that has a lower heel cup that is wider as opposed to a taller one that holds you in place. One of the largest considerations that we need to make, though, is the closure system. So how is it that the shoe closes? And there are, broadly speaking, there's 3 types of closure system, one that you don't see much of these days. First one is Velcro. This is cheap, this is cheerful. But you know what? It's fast, it's easy to use. The downside to Velcro is that it will leave sort of strips of pressure, I think is probably the best way to place it, over your feet. which means that, if you have, most shoes will have 2 strips of Velcro, and as you do those up nice and tightly over your feet, you will be able to feel those straps digging into your feet as you start to ride and your feet swell up. Of course, you can always loosen them naturally, but then your feet may start sliding around a little bit more in there. So, Velcro is fine, but there's a reason that it's only found in the cheaper shoes. The next option up is a ratchet system, and this is the one we don't see so much of these days. And this is where you'll have a strip that will pass through sort of ratcheting system that you'll pull tight with your hand, and then you'll use a lever to ratchet up another couple of notches, and that will hold your foot nice and tight in the shoe. The downside to these is that they do wear out. They do need replacing, but to be honest, all closure systems wear out. But these tend to wear out faster. My first cycling shoes were ratchet shoes, and they did get to the point where they really didn't do their job very well after a while. But they were on the cheaper end of things, to be fair. And they don't leave as much of a pressure strip over your foot as Velcro will. But the best option is what we call the Boa dial. Now, Boa is a brand. It is a company who make these closing systems, and you can swap them between shoes. In fact, when I worked at the bike shop, the sales rep came in, and a couple of days a year they'd come down and they have all these different coloured Boa dials that people could buy, and they could swap out with the ones on their shoes. So when the dial wears out, you can just replace the dial rather than having to replace the whole shoe, which is very lovely. The way that these work is that it's a dial that you tighten and loosen that is attached to a wire system. And this wire system, it runs around the shoe in a pattern the manufacturer has chosen. But you'll have either 1 or 2 Boa dials on the shoe. And the way, because it's a dial that's sort of a bit like a volume dial, I guess, it's very easy, although more clicky. It's very easy to add a little bit or reduce a little bit of pressure, a bit of tension on your foot whilst you're putting your shoes on or while you're riding. Some manufacturers, they have their own version of the Boa dial. Generally speaking, these are a little bit pony. The actual official Boa dials are the best, but they're not compatible with those shoes. These are brands which I have on good authority. They are simply holdouts. There are 1 or 2 people on the board who believe that this manufacturer, all of the parts should come from the country that the manufacturer is based in, or they're not going to have any third-party components on their shoes. And so they've created a very budget version of their own, because they can see which way the wind's blowing. They recognise that this is the best way to do it, but they haven't been able to invest as much in their closure system. And for an example, to loosen some of these, rather than just doing the dial up anti-clockwise, undoing it anti-clockwise, instead what they have to do is actually lift pop the dial off of the shoe, and then take a bit off and then push it back in and tighten it up again. It's really not that ergonomic or that good. They do tend to wear out fast. It is harder to get replacements because there aren't as many around. But if the shoes that have that in-house closure system are the ones that fit your feet best, you should be fine. They just won't be as good as the official Boa dials. Now, the Boa dials, they spread the pressure out really nicely because it's wires, and the way that the wires are rigged, you really don't feel any pressure on over a specific area of your foot. The pressure is spread out over the entirety of your feet. And if your feet do start to swell up, you just back the dial off a click or 2 and you'll be in a much better position. These are pretty much the industry standard now for any shoes over about £120. Some real budget shoes, you can get Velcro, and some people just prefer Velcro. Hey, I'm not going to tell you what it is that you have to wear, but in most cases, Boa dials are what manufacturers are going for because they are just the best option. The material that the shoe is made up of the sole, is also important. So the upper and the sole. So the upper, which is sort of the fabric-y part, I guess is probably the easiest way to describe it. How breathable or not that is going to dictate what conditions you might want to ride with that shoe in. But the sole, how stiff the sole is going to have an impact on your cycling, which is how much force is lost through the flexion of the shoe. So if you have, say, a trainer, if you're riding along in your trainers, as you're pushing down, because these shoes are so flexible, because they have to be, you lose power when you're doing so. Whereas if you have a really stiff sole on that shoe, every time you push down, you get much higher percentage of that power goes through the sole and is not lost within the squishiness of that trainer. So all cycling shoes are going to have a stiff sole. Now you have a sort of a composite sole, and you have like a fully carbon sole. Some shoes go for an outrageously stiff carbon to the point that it's actually kind of uncomfortable to wear, to walk around in, and that because of how stiff it is. And you know what? The jury is out on just how beneficial going for full carbon is over the composite. It's going to be a bit lighter. It will be a bit stiffer, but it's not going to make as much of a difference as the marketers might have you believe. So the upper, again, how thick the upper is, think about, when is it that I can ride this shoe? Has it got a really thin upper? Is this really a sort of a summer shoe? Or is it a very thick, weatherproof upper that's going to keep the wind and the rain off, that's better suited towards winter riding? Most shoes are somewhere between the two, but you do need to pay attention to this and ask the salesperson as well if you're in doubt. Next up we have gloves. Now gloves, you can ride with them in the summer if you wish. In the winter they're definitely a bit of a necessity, or in the late autumn, the early spring, when it's just going to be too cold on your fingers to be able to be riding without long fingered gloves. You won't be able to operate your brakes or your gears. So whether you wear lightweight gloves, sort of fingerless gloves in the summer or not, is up to you, honestly. Some people just prefer riding with gloves. I think those who they get sweaty hands, they hate the feeling of the sweat on the bar tape, which is understandable. Other people, they just want the freedom. One plus side to wearing gloves is that if you crash, then you don't lose as much skin off of your hand if you're wearing gloves. You can also get padded gloves, which take some of the vibrations out of the road as well. It really is up to you. When it comes to the cold weather, I recommend that you have lightweight gloves. I recommend that you have some really heavy duty winter gloves if you're going to be heading out in those kinds of conditions. And you get yourself some glove liners as well, some merino glove liners. These help because they give you an extra layer of insulation in the glove, and we all know that air traps heat. And they also allow you to mix and match. So if the weather is a little bit too cold for your your lightweight gloves, but not quite warranting getting out the really big gloves, you can use the glove liner to make your lightweight gloves an awful lot more useful, more impactful, more insulating. Whereas if you are on the other side of things, maybe, and you find that you're just maybe too cold, you can't keep your hands warm at all, even in the thickest gloves, adding in a pair of glove liners, it can really help offset that level of numbness that you get in your hands. Other cold weather gear that you might want to consider include arm warmers. Now, I touched on these earlier, but arm warmers are an absolutely fantastic way to moderate your temperature, because if it's too cold, you can put your arm warmers on. So you may start out, even in the early autumn, it can start off quite chilly but really warm up later. So if you have your arm warmers on when you start your ride, if you then start to overheat later when the sun comes out and things really start to warm up, you can take your arm warmers off. These, you can make you feel, is this some kind of 80s fashion accessory? I get it, but they are really useful. I do recommend that you get arm warmers that are insulated, that have that sort of fleecy lining to them. They are lovely to wear, lovely to put on. You can also get knee warmers and leg warmers if you want to keep your lower half cool as well. Leg warmers are a great way to turn your cycling shorts into a pair of cycling tights, but without needing to spend the money on cycling tights, which are expensive. They're not as insulating, they do slip down a little bit as you ride, but it is a short-term solution if you don't have all the money to spend on a full winter kit right away. If you want to have a quite a wintry kit on a budget, you can have a weatherproof jersey, you can have arm warmers, you can have a base layer, maybe a long sleeve base layer. And that will go quite a long way, because his weatherproof jackets are absolutely fantastic for keeping anything except the sun or the real cold off of you. Any wind, any rain, anything like that is absolutely brilliant. and keeping those off of you. So I wear my Castelli Gabba, okay? Another brand recommendation there, but they are the best. The materials that they use are fantastic. The Castelli Gabba are some of the best money that you can spend in cycling. If you're going to be riding outdoors in variable conditions, you will thank me later. Something else I recommend you have a look at are pairs of overshoes. Now, these are for conditions where it's going to be wet or it's going to be cold and they slip over your shoes. So they fully encompass your shoe. You can get sort of ones that just cover your toes. I quite like using those in the spring and the autumn. It just helps keep the chill off of my feet, off my toes. But your full overshoes, they're great in the rain. They're great in the wind and the cold. They will help protect your feet a bit. But I'm going to level with you. If you're going to go out riding outdoors in the cold weather, your feet are going to get cold at some point. There's only so long that you can delay the inevitable thaw. But if you're only going out for a shorter ride, if you're only going to be going out for, sort of 90 minutes or something, then some overshoes might actually help you keep your feet warm for long enough that they've still got some feeling in them by the time they get back home. Something else that's great for changeable conditions is a gilet. Now this is a lightweight, in most cases you can get some that are made of thicker material, but in most cases these are lightweight, sleeveless, sort of, gilets really, that you stick over and they keep your torso nice and warm. Okay, they keep the wind off in most cases, they keep the rain off. Now you do get some which are more sort of shells than they are water resistant, like many that you'll get. So they may not be very good in the rain, but if it is just windy, then they could help to keep the wind off of your chest. And if you are riding and you want to put one on, you can get it out your pocket and stick it on. If you get a bit warm, you can take it off and stick it in your back pocket. They are small, they pack up really nicely. And I rarely leave home without one if I'm going out in just a short sleeve jersey, because if I find myself somewhere really windy where I run the risk of getting really cold, then I do recommend that you have a look at, getting yourself a gilet just so you can use one as a get out of jail free card, because it really is properly miserable when you're over an hour from home and you're absolutely freezing cold. Getting battered by wind, it really is a test of character. So having these gilets on you, so that you can whack one on in emergency is really helpful. The other item that you might need in emergency is a rain jacket. Now, a lot of people, especially triathletes, if they can see it's really raining outdoors, they're probably not going to go for an outdoor ride. In this day and age where indoor training is so good, they're going to go, I'm going to stick the bike on the turbo instead. But if it looks like a lovely day, but there are chances of showers out there and you can see there are some menacing clouds, but you don't necessarily want to jump on the turbo because it's just too nice, then I recommend you get a pack-away waterproof jacket. Again, you can stick it in your back pocket and it will do a fantastic job of keeping you dry for a short period. Now, the materials are improving. In days gone by, they were known as boil-in-a-bag jerseys because they really weren't very breathable. If you want something to be waterproof, it's not really going to be very breathable. Some of the materials that they're bringing out now are really good, but they tend to they're more sort of proper rain jackets that somebody might wear if they were going out for a ride they knew was going to be wet. And it's the kind of jacket you can't really take off and put in your back pocket. You might hand it to your team in the team car if you're a professional cyclist. But as triathletes, we're probably not going to be going out in the kind of rain that would warrant those kinds of jackets anyway. But technology is improving, the prices are coming down. And these are a fantastic way for you to keep yourself dry in changeable conditions just by having these cheap, small, pack-away waterproof jackets in your pocket with you. It could be the difference between you getting out for a ride and having a nice time, or not getting out for a ride at all, or getting absolutely drenched to the bone. So they are money well spent. Now, if you're going to go out and it's going to be absolutely biting cold, I would always question whether you should really be going out. In these cases, if I'm honest, is there any risk? If there was a frost last night, if there's any risk of ice on the road, don't go out. It's just not worth it. You could end up crashing, breaking your collarbone before your season has even started. So I do recommend that you be careful, but some days you want to go out, it's absolutely freezing. You can wear a cycling jacket. And again, if you're going to be cycle commuting, getting back to work, cycling to work and back in all temperatures, in all conditions, this is money well spent because it can help get you out on days where it would just be too cold otherwise. They're quite thick. They go over a short sleeve jersey in most cases, but they could go over a long sleeve jersey if really needed. They're quite thick, normally best used with a base layer as well. And a number of them, they have vents that can open to help you sort of dump heat out if you start to overheat. These are really useful for those who are going to be serious cold weather cyclists who want to get out and ride all year round. And you know what? I think it's quite nice if you can get out all year round. Even if you just go for sort of an hour, 90 minutes outdoors on days where it's really nice and you do most of your training on the turbo trainer, it just helps you remind you why it is that you're putting in all this training, all these hours on the indoor trainer, because of how lovely it can end up being when you're riding outdoors. Now, the final item on my notes here is eyewear. And I do recommend that everyone who goes out road cycling has some kind of eyewear. The reason being is that you can end up with bits of gravel on the road that get kicked up by cars or other cyclists, and if they hit you square in the eye, you can at the very least suffer, some cuts and some damage. In some cases, it can shatter your cornea. So you do, again, it would be a 1 in a million for it to happen to you. But let's be honest here, if you're wearing eyewear, it's going to keep rain out your eyes, it's going to keep dust out of your eyes, it's going to keep the sun out of your eyes, it's going to keep bits of gravel out of your eyes. We need to look after our eyes. So I reckon it's really important, especially if you are going out and doing long rides in the sun, because we do need to protect our eyes from the UV. So when we're looking for eyewear, I recommend that you don't go and spend silly money on these. You can spend an absolute fortune on some Oakleys, which talk about the fancy lenses that they have. Honestly, I've never gone in for those. I've always gone for either photochromic lenses, so these are ones that change depending on how bright the sun is. So on a really dark day they'll be clear, but on a very sunny day, within the first minute or so of your ride, they will cloud over and they will become sort of darker. They'll sort of light sensitive. These are really useful. Now, there's only so many changes they have in their lifespan, so you may not get more than a couple of years out of them, but you don't need to spend an absolute arm and leg either. They are getting cheaper, the price is coming down. Or you can get some glasses where you can interchange lenses. So you can have your clear lenses for riding at night or on rainy, dark days. You can have your sort of yellow lenses as well, which some people like to have in low light conditions to brighten everything up. You can have your mirrored or your really darker lenses for when it's really sunny. It just gives you, that bit of flexibility. But, if you got the cash and you want to get some Oakleys, or you want to get a selection of lenses that you can use glasses rather than lenses, you know what? Knock yourself out. But I do recommend that when you are out riding, that you do look to protect your eyes. Okay, I think, emphasis on think, that's everything that we needed to cover with regards to cycle clothing. So I'm going to move on now to bike fitting. Now, how you sit on your bike, your comfort level on the bike is paramount. So if you're not comfortable, you can't perform. Before we get started, I want to talk about something very important. Now, I mentioned it in the first episode, but I'm going to mention it again in case you've forgotten. This is something called a bottom bracket. And this, if you look at your pedals, they're attached to your crank arms. And your crank arms are then attached to what's called the bottom bracket. Now, this you can't see because it's all inside the inside the bike. But it runs through the bottom of the bike. And it's what connects but it doesn't connect your crank arms together, but it allows for the easy movement of them. There's bearings in there which help keep things moving nicely, because the bottom bracket is where just about everything on a bike is measured from, because it is sort of the heart of the bike, and so people talk about something in relation to the bottom bracket quite often. So I'm going to refer to this a few times. And just to help give you an idea. And another disclaimer is that I'm not a bike fitter. My knowledge on bike fitting, it's okay. But as a coach, it's really not something that I need to have a thorough understanding of, because you know what I can do? I can send my clients to bike fitters. People who have studied, biomechanics, kinesiology, all of these sports science, all of these subjects, that they will really understand exactly how to get the body comfortable on the bike much better than I can. So I'm going to talk to you about the basics of bike fitting, but I'm certainly not going to make any major, here's an easy win, this is what you want to do here. Because it does depend on the individual, and I really don't want to put you in a position where you are sort of unsafe on the bike or even sort of more uncomfortable than when you started. Now, if you can afford it, I highly recommend that you go and you get yourself a proper bike fitting. Now, a bike fitting isn't something that you get from your bike when you pick it up from the shop. That is sort of 20 minutes of the salesperson making sure they get the saddle about roughly the right height, and they make some very, very basic tweaks. It's more kind of a sizing, and it's more of an after sales thing. Now, hopefully when you buy your bike, they'll go and then measure your height and your inseam and narrow the bikes down and find out which one it is that you want to get. But there is a chance that they won't, and you could end up with a bike that doesn't really fit you very well. Now, when it comes to bikes, there's a lot that a bike fitter can do to make a small frame a bit more comfortable. There's not a lot they can do to make a larger frame that's sort of too big for you more comfortable. So if in doubt, do go for the smaller size bike. Ideally, actually, if you don't have a bike yet, is go to a bike fitter and say, I want you to measure me up and I want you to recommend some bikes for me because I want to know which ones it is that I can buy. And they take all of your measurements, assuming this is something they've done before and they're comfortable doing. They take all your measurements and they'll then run it through and they'll look at some bikes that they can recommend for you and make sure that you get the right size. And if you're doing it through, a proper bike shop, you'll do the bike fitting, they'll get you on the jig, which is this contraption they fit you on that, mimics a bike, and you can move the saddle and the handlebars in all different directions. They'll get you feeling comfortable on that, they take the measurements, and then the bike will be built up to your measurements, and you can roll out the door on that perfectly fitting bike, okay? It's the best way to do things, because the last thing I want anyone to do is to roll up at a bike fitter. They've paid £250 for this appointment, normally about 3 hours. These appointments, they are very in-depth. And for the bike fitter to go, yeah, you've bought the wrong bike, I'm sorry, there's not a lot I can do for you there. Now, the exact process is going to depend from bike fitter to bike fitter and shop to shop. But generally speaking, when you arrive, ask you a few questions about how you feel on the bike. They want to understand a bit about you, your goals, what it is that you're doing. And they should do a mobility test where they get you sort of on a masseur's bed, as it were, fold-out bed, and they will do some mobility tests. So they're going to want to see, how much mobility it is that you have in your hips. They're going to want to check for weakness and tightness in your glutes, all these different areas they're going to be looking at to assess, get an idea about you and how you move. Then they will get the measurements for your bike, assuming that you have bought a bike in. And they're going to recreate that bike, your bike, on the jig that you'll be riding on. So you'll hop on the jig, and that will be set up in the position that your bike currently is. And then they will start raising the saddle, moving the handlebars further away or closer to you. They'll start changing the dimensions of the bike and asking you how that feels. Because they'll hopefully have the experience to be able to look at you and go, yeah, I think what we need to do is I think we need to raise that saddle, shift the saddle slightly forwards, or we're going to need to bring the handlebars back and change the angle a little bit. They have quite a lot of tools available to a bike fitter, but they're not just going to look at the saddle and the seat post and the handlebars and all that. They're also going to be looking at your shoes. And if you are about to buy yourself a new bike, and you are looking to get a fitting as well, I recommend you hold off on buying cycling shoes until you've had your bike fitting, because they will be able to look at your feet, they'll be able to put you in different pairs of shoes, assuming that you work somewhere where they... assuming that you're visiting somewhere where they have cycling shoes in boxes downstairs or upstairs, where you can try on these different shoes, and they will be able to recommend not only the kind of shoe that you have, but any support, any insoles, any shims that go under the cleats, and they're also going to be able to set your cleats up for you. Now, when you buy, especially 3-bolt cleat systems, there is a lot of flexibility. Now, when you buy your cleats and you install them yourself, I recommend you put them as far back as you can, and you try to make them as you just sort of have them pointing forwards. Is the safest way to have them. If you want to get a bit more specific, you can close your eyes, march on the spot, look down, open your eyes, look down at your feet, and see how they naturally fall, because that's the kind of the angles that you'll be pedaling at. Your feet will be in that position at rest, and you can make some adjustments to that, but you can sometimes get yourself in trouble there. So if in doubt, just have them nice and neutral as far back as they go. But a bike fitter will be able to help you get them there. And if you suffer with, numbness in your feet or your hands or anything that's really affecting your enjoyment of cycling, a bike fit is the best way to go about this. But they are expensive. I'm going to say they're worth it, especially if you have lofty performance goals. But that does not stop the fact that you'll be looking at, for a good 3-hour fitting, probably minimum £200, okay? It is a lot of cash. You can get some bike fitters that do it out of their garage and do that for a much lower rate, but they won't have access to the same cameras. They won't have access to saddle mapping, where you sit down on a device and it maps the pressure and how it's sat on the saddle, and they can then recommend saddles that would be better suited to you. There's a lot they can't do, but they can get you more comfortable. But anyway, let's break down the basics of bike fitting and what it is that you can do yourself at home. Now, the first and most impactful one is saddle height. Now, if your parents taught you how to ride a bike, chances are they would have set your saddle so that you could put both feet down on the ground and the saddle, you'd be sat on the saddle. Now, this is for safety, because a small child riding a bike, them being safe and happy and confident is the most important thing. As road cyclists, we are more interested in performance. We're grown adults. Well, probably adults. You could be listening to this under 18 for all I know. But when we're setting our saddle height, we are instead focused on efficiency, and for that, we are going to want our saddle to be at a point where our leg is just about fully extended at the bottom of each pedal stroke. Now, if you fit with the rule of I can sit on my saddle with both of my feet on the ground, 99.9% of people in that situation, their saddle will be too low. When they pedal, their leg won't come anywhere close to straight. And for us to straighten that leg and get more force as we're pedaling, we need to raise that saddle. Now, if we raise the saddle too high, that can also cause issues where for us to, because we're locked into the pedals or we're trying to reach the pedals, where our hips will shift from side to side as we're pedaling. And that's no good. We don't want that. We don't want our hips to be dropping as we pedal. But equally, if our saddle is too low, it puts a lot of load through our quadriceps, and we don't get any recruitment from our glutes or our hamstrings, really, a very low level. And that can result in knee pain as you become overly quad dominant. So it is a balance. And the way to find this is to raise your saddle up until you feel that your leg, it helps if somebody, like, you can get a family member that can video you cycling. A turbo trainer, an indoor trainer is the ideal place to do this. But you're there on your bike and you're pedaling, and you want your leg to be just shy of full extension. I don't want your leg to go completely straight at any point, because that means that your hips are probably going to be dropping to that side as you do so. To get another video of you from behind so you can see how much your hips move as you're pedaling, but you want it to be really mechanically smooth and efficient. You want to have a very straight leg. If in doubt, watch videos of professional cyclists, professional triathletes. Have a look at their saddle height, have a look at how their legs pedal. That would give you an idea of the kind of thing that you're looking to achieve. Now, if you are very nervous about this, because as soon as you raise the saddle, you can no longer put both feet on the ground, and that could be quite scary to people starting out. So what we should do in these situations is we should be setting our saddle at the point where we can put one foot down on the ground and we have to lean the bike a little bit. That's generally how we go about that. I recommend broadly against somebody unclipping both feet when they're out and about, because it takes time to get that other foot back in at the lights. I mean, that's what I did when I first started, but you find yourself faffing around trying to clip in when the light turns green. Whereas if you have one foot in at all times, which normally in the UK will be your right foot, because you can then put your left foot to the side of the road and it doesn't get run over then by anyone coming the other way. Whereas if you are in on the mainland Europe or in the US, you probably unclip your right foot so that you can put that close to the pavement or sidewalk or whatever you call it. But you will have to lean the bike slightly to do so, because you won't be able to touch the ground with both feet. This, broadly isn't an issue. It can be scary to get to start with. And what I will do is I recommend that somebody increases their saddle height slowly if they're feeling nervous, until they get to the point where they're feeling much more confident with it. The next major component of bike fit is reach. So this is measured from the saddle to the handlebars. And essentially it dictates how much you are reaching forward. Now, this is going to have a real impact on sort of your comfort levels, because if you're overreaching, if you're reaching it way too far because you wanted to get yourself in a nice low flat position, this can cause lower back issues, as well as in your upper back and your neck as well, if you're trying to look where it is that you're going. So you do need to make sure that you get this right. It really does come down to sort of the individual really here, on what it is that you're looking for, how aggressive it is that you want to be, how far away you want the handlebars to be from you. As we get older, or if you have sort of poor mobility, then the handlebars may need to be closer. Whereas if you are, sort of 21 and really mobile, been cycling and active for years, you could get yourself in this really long reach, really low handlebars, and really curl yourself around them and get yourself into this nice aggressive racy position. It does come down to what it is that that you're looking for, but when it comes to adjusting the reach, this isn't as simple as a saddle height where there's a bolt that we can do and we can send the saddle up and down. We would be looking at buying new components, so you really need to make sure that you get this right. You'll be looking at a sort of a stem that is the bit that runs between sort of your bike and the handlebars. It's that horizontal piece of metal or sometimes carbon. And what you do there is you would remove that stem and you install your new one, which would be shorter or longer, and that would change the position. Of course, the difficulty with this is that if you don't know what length it is that you need, there can be this element of trial and error. It can be difficult. So I recommend that you look at that. Now, something I recommend you don't touch, and I can understand it'd be very tempting to do so, is what's called your saddle fore-aft, which is how far forward your saddle is. Because as you move your saddle forwards, that's going to move it further over the bottom bracket, which can bring unwanted issues with it. So you could find yourself with the bottom bracket almost behind you as you pedal, if you find yourself in sort of quite an aggressive position there. Or you could even find yourself in this rather bizarre position where the bottom bracket is actually kind of in front of you and you're almost like reclining. It could look very strange. So the stem is what most people probably need to change. The saddle fore-aft, you can change that. You will need to move your saddle a little bit further forwards if you're running clip-on aero bars. And if you're running clip-on aero bars, you probably need a separate fit for those as opposed to a road position. It's one of the reasons that, if you can afford it, having a road bike and a triathlon bike is perfect, because you have your road bike and you can be set up for riding on the road, all-day comfort. You have your race bike, which is for more race day, more aggressive. And you got those two fits. Whereas if you have clip-on aero bars on a road bike, you need to shift the saddle forward and change the fit to get comfortable on the aero bars, but then makes it uncomfortable when you're not on the aero bars. So it is a real compromise. It is a real fiddle there. But when we are sort of getting ourselves fitted on this when we're trying to set our reach, it should realistically, I mean, you can play around with the handlebars as well, get different sizes of handlebars, but the stem, changing the stem is where most of that movement should come from. I wouldn't recommend touching the saddle fore or aft. Speaking of the saddle, you can tilt your saddle slightly up, you can tilt your saddle slightly down. I recommend against playing with the tilt of the saddle, really. Some people like to have a slight tilt downwards with their saddle. They find that more comfortable. I've yet to meet anyone who's found any real mileage in having a saddle that tilts up. But not to say that there's not a case out there for it. I've just never come across it myself. Most people, though, they're going to want a nice flat saddle. I do recommend you do get the spirit level out for this one. Really make sure your saddle is nice and flat. That is going to make a big difference. Because if you find yourself sliding forwards ever so slightly, you have to keep readjusting your position in the saddle. And that's going to be really frustrating. Now, another really important factor in bike fit is what's known as the drop. And this is a measurement from the drop from the height of the saddle to the handlebars. Now, if you're riding a road bike, in almost every situation, your saddle is going to be higher than your handlebars as you lean forward and you get yourself in a nice low position. If you watch people who are on what are called sort of sit-up and beg bikes, which you see people riding around in sort of places like Holland, then they will have a saddle that is much lower. This is an inefficient way to ride, but hey, they're getting around, it doesn't matter. When we are riding for performance, we are going to want our saddle to be higher than our handlebars. And how much higher our saddle is relative to our handlebars is known as our drop, and it's measured in centimetres. Now, for most people, they're going to want to be looking at a drop of around, I think the average is about 4 to 7 centimetres. If you have a drop that is much lower than 3 centimetres, then it's not going to be putting you in an especially, fast position, but it may be that you lack the mobility to get that low, so that's absolutely fine. Additionally, once you start getting towards 9 or even 10 centimetres or more of drop, this is going to put you in quite an uncomfortable, aggressive position and is certainly not suitable for extended periods. Now, to increase your drop, you'll remove spacers from underneath your stem. So your stem, where it attaches to your bike, there'll be a series of metal discs that are underneath it. You can probably look at those on any bike that you can find. And if you want to get your handlebars lower, you sort of take the handlebars off, remove some of the discs that are the spacers that are underneath the stem, place them on top of the stem, and when you rebuild the bike, then the handlebars will be lower. And again, if you want to reduce the drop, then you can do it the other way around. But most bikes, when they ship, when you receive them, the handlebars will be right at the top of the spacers. It'll be up to you to lower that as you see fit. I do recommend against just listening to what people say and what they call sort of slamming the stem, so putting it right down as low as you can. So it's really as close to the wheel as possible to get yourself into a nice aggressive position. This is just, people trying to show off or not actually showing any understanding of biomechanics or how you can actually get somebody comfortable and fast enough to perform. Again, there's only so much I feel qualified to advise on here, but I recommend that you have a look at the bike fit of, a lot of successful triathletes, successful cyclists, and look at them. And when you're looking at things such as the handlebar tilt, or areas like that where you think, oh, maybe it'd be a bit like interesting, maybe I could do something a bit different here with this, maybe that would be more comfortable. Have a look at what cyclists are doing and ask yourself, hang on, if everybody is riding along with handlebars dead flat, then having mine pointed up to help improve my comfort probably isn't the way to go. There's probably something else that I'm missing there. You've got handlebar width taken into consideration. There are a huge amount of factors that you need to consider with bike fitting, and that's why it's a profession. That's why I don't know a huge amount about it. So bike fitting, I'm going to leave it there, and I'm going to move on now to training, which of all the subjects that I've talked about over these 3 episodes is the one that I am actually an expert in. Now, the first training tip for somebody moving towards sort of proper road cycling is how you have to approach it differently to the cycling you would have done before. Now, when I was riding before I sort of started triathlon and road cycling, I had what I would call a push and coast approach to cycling, which I think actually a lot of people have without realising it. And off-road cycling lends itself to it a bit, but it's where you work hard for a short period of time and then you'll coast. Either on a sort of a slight downhill or because your legs are tired and you let your legs recover for a bit and then you start riding again. And when you are riding off-road where you're going to have to be sort of working around sort of pedestrians who might also be on the piece of bridleway or, hopefully not on the mountain bike trail, but you have other people around, you'll be working harder for short periods of time and then you have periods of rest. Road cycling, especially triathlon, we don't have this. We are essentially riding a time trial. We're trying to see how fast we can cover the distance we're competing over. Whether that is 12 kilometres, 20 kilometres, 40 kilometres, 90 kilometres or 180 kilometres. We are looking to traverse that distance as fast as we can. And that is going to mean constant pedalling. Of course, you freewheel in the corners and on the steep downhills. But otherwise, I want you to be pedalling the entire time. And this is a real mindset shift. Because we have gone from, we're going out sort of to have fun, leisure, chatting, pointing things out, stopping for a break and a drink, to being on a bike and going, I need to be pedalling non-stop. Non-stop. I need to eat while pedalling, I need to drink while pedalling, I need to train my legs to not take a break, for them to be able to push hard for the entirety of this event, or the training ride. And this takes a large amount of practice, a large amount of training. And there are two main things we're trying to train here: aerobic fitness and muscular endurance. Now I'm going to be looking at both of these from a very high level. So I'm not going to be getting into the weeds and, looking at the exact way that the different energy systems work. I'm not going to go down there. What I am going to be looking at, however, is how you can change your training, how you can change how you ride your bike to help you prepare you better for race day. There is going to be a bit of science, but mainly it's going to be actionable insights. So the aerobic fitness is the one that you will likely struggle with the most when you start out. Because we build up muscular endurance from walking around and from the time that we'd already spent cycling. But aerobic fitness, having the fitness to be able to pedal consistently without getting out of breath, is what holds most people back. Obviously, for some people, it's more the muscular endurance aspect, but especially if you sort of work on your feet, your legs should already have some level of strength to them. So with aerobic fitness, we build this by doing one or two things. Either by doing lots of steady state riding in what we call zone 2. And this, if you have a heart rate monitor or a power meter, you can measure your zone 2 and what it is you need to be riding at. If you don't, if you're just trying to keep things simple, most of your riding should be done at a conversation that you could, at a pace that you can hold a conversation at. So if I was heading out for a ride, I would be not necessarily chatting to someone, but I'd feel that I had the ability to if I needed to. Which can be hard to get for people to get their head around. They go, why do you want me to ride that slowly? Shouldn't I be pushing my limits? Shouldn't I be really trying to push my fitness and ride faster? Well, the reason that we're doing this slower riding is that it allows us to ride for longer. And somebody who can ride for 3 hours at a steady state is going to be fitter and faster, even over shorter distances, than somebody who gets out of puff after 15 minutes. So it's building up the endurance, building up your tolerance to be able to ride for longer. And in doing so, then when we inhale oxygen, air, we get more oxygen into our lungs, which gets into our bloodstream faster, which gets pumped to our muscles faster by our big, strong heart, and gets delivered to our muscles where they need to be. This is the cornerstone of triathlon performance, having this improved aerobic fitness. We also need to develop muscular endurance, which is simply allowing our muscles in our legs to be able to make the same movement over and over and over without tiring. Now, we're never going to be able to train you to the point where your legs are never going to start to feel that burn, or where you're never going to feel short on oxygen. That's just never going to happen. But what we can do is we can make sure that for a given effort and over a prolonged period of time, you can hold a faster speed. If you have a heart rate monitor and you find out what your heart rate zone 2 is, and I recommend that heart rate is a nice, cheap, affordable way to train. You can go, right, okay, I've done the calculations and I need to stay below 145 beats per minute on this ride. And it'll feel painfully slow. But the next time you go out, you'll be just a little bit faster. And the time after that, just a little bit more. Before you know it, where you may have averaged 15 miles an hour on the first ride that you did of that, which was half an hour at 145 beats per minute. Now, you're averaging 23 miles an hour and you're able to hold that for 2 hours. Now, triathlon, as far as sports go, it is the original delayed gratification. This is the ability for somebody to do something that isn't especially exciting to them in this moment, but they know that if they keep it up, they will reap greater rewards further down the line. Did experiments on this where they brought a child into, went to a school and they brought children into a room and they said, here is a cookie on a plate. And I'm going to step outside of this room and I'm going to be back in 5 minutes. And if you have not eaten your cookie, I will give you 2 cookies. Now, admittedly, these were children, but I can't remember, something like 80%, 70, 80% of children just ate that one. They go, well, there's one in front of me and I want it now. Whereas there were a minority who said, well, no, I'm going to resist the temptation. I'm going to wait for 2 cookies. They did a follow-up several years down the line, got in touch with the parents of the children who originally signed up to the study, and they found that the children who waited and bided their time and got the 2 cookies, who went through that delayed gratification, were generally much more successful in life than those who just went for the now and go, I want that now. So there's a bit of faith with this. And I've had various athletes that I've coached, that I've trained, and they've said to me, Simon, honestly, I'm not sure about this zone 2 training. Or they've quietly had those moments in their head where they've been doubtful, where they thought, you know what, I'm paying this guy, I'm going to listen to him, I'm going to stick to the plan. I remember one guy, we did loads of this easy riding. Of course, with some hard intervals, I'll get onto those in a minute. Did lots of this easy riding, and he did his race. And he said to me, relative to the last one that he did before he worked with me, I could just keep going. I could just keep pushing, and I felt great, and I had loads of energy, and I was overtaking loads of people without really working. Yes, this is what happens when you work on your aerobic fitness. So, a mixture of that zone 2 easy steady state riding, as well as some VO2 max intervals. Now, your VO2 max is a measure of the absolute maximum amount of oxygen that your body is able to process before it goes anaerobic, before it starts eating into its reserves. So when you do a sprint and you're absolutely exhausted at the end of it, that is you being anaerobic. So a VO2 max interval will be an effort that you could hold for a maximum of like 4 or 5 minutes, an absolute max. This is, we're not burning through our batteries super quickly like we would in a 100-meter sprint, but still it's not super sustainable, but it is using more of our aerobic fitness than it is our anaerobic fitness. And by doing these intervals, which generally tend to be between like 105 and like 115% of your threshold heart rate or power, I'll get into that in a bit. But doing these brutally hard intervals, we can improve our body's ability to process oxygen, which again is going to really help boost our aerobic fitness. And when somebody comes to me and is looking for help preparing for an event, this is the main thing that we focus on. Especially if it's going to be their first event. I want you to be able to go out there to complete your Ironman 70.3 or your Olympic triathlon or even a sprint triathlon or maybe even a full Ironman, to be able to hold a high pace, a high speed for a prolonged period of time. Same with marathon running, same with long distance swimming, same with any endurance sport. The more hours that we can put in, the faster we'll be, broadly speaking. There comes a tipping point. And if we're going to be putting in big training weeks, we need most of that training to be at a low volume so we're not burned out. Now, the muscular endurance side of things, we're going to develop this by doing sessions at a higher intensity that challenge our muscles more. Now, Towards the end of our easy zone 2 sessions, we will be improving our muscular endurance anyway, simply by, the fact that we're keeping our legs moving for that long. But if we really want to boost our muscles' ability to be able to keep pushing harder for longer, we will need to do more riding at a higher intensity. Now, it's worth pointing out that there are no sessions where you only improve one of these, where you simply only improve aerobic fitness or you simply only improve muscular endurance. You're always improving both, but we can change these intensities around with the intervals, the way that we build that, to ensure that we are building both in isolation as well as together, to make sure that we are not neglecting one. Now, a lot of muscular endurance work is designed to improve our body's ability to clear lactate. So, that burning sensation you get in your legs when you're running or cycling at a high intensity for prolonged periods? That's lactic acid. And we want to improve our body's ability to clear this, or if we are fit enough, to stop needing to use it to produce energy in the first place at all. Now, in modern day coaching and training, most people are going to be training with some kind of zone system. So I'm going to talk you through a 5-zone system. There are lots of different systems that are pushed by different coaches, different schools of thought. We're going to keep it nice and simple. Okay, so firstly, zone 1 out of 5. Zone 1 is your recovery, it is your warm-up, it is your cool-down. When you're working at this level, you are going to be taking things really easy. Soft pedaling, recovering between intervals. You're not really going to feel like you're working here. Moving into zone 2, this is where we'll do a lot of our training, and if we are doing a 70.3 or an Ironman, we are going to end up finding ourselves in this position where we are racing in zone 2. Unless you are an especially accomplished 70.3 athlete, we're going to be racing in zone 2. Because that's our easy all-day pace, and we just want our zone 2 to be faster than other people's zone 2. That's how we win races, or even complete them. So that's a pace where you should be a conversational pace. So you should be able to chat to other people. It shouldn't feel overly taxing, but it will start to add up. What feels really easy for the first 10 minutes, by the time you get to the end of your ride, you might start to find it challenging you a little bit more than you expected it to. Zone 3 is often known as tempo. And this is something which, let's be honest, it can really get a bad rep. Now, I don't use much zone 3 in my coaching, but I do use it occasionally. It's when you're at that uncomfortable intensity, where you're not actually riding hard enough to actually really make big gains in fitness, but you're not going easy enough to make sure that it's sustainable and you're not going to feel that fatigue tomorrow. This is the zone that most people will default to. If you were to give somebody a bike and say, here we go ride that bike to train for a race, chances are they'll sit in zone 3. It feels good, it feels comfortably hard. It's great for building muscular endurance, that is one of the real benefits of it. But it's not hard enough to actually make a real impact on our fitness, and as I said, it really generates a decent amount of fatigue. So it's not something I overdo a huge amount. Now, if somebody is preparing for something like an Ironman 70.3, that's probably when I'll do the most tempo work. And my 70.3 plans, they have a lot of them have a tempo block towards the end, because we've already hit race distance in zone 2, so we're trying to build up our muscular endurance to help us hold a higher pace on race day. Even if we won't be racing at zone 3, we will have improved muscular endurance from this training. So there is a place for it, I just don't do it a huge amount. Zone 4, on the other hand, zone 4 is, doing some threshold work is an essential in most training plans. This is the really hard riding. The kind of riding, if you're going to go out and ride for as fast as you can for an hour, you would be at that intensity. So it hurts, it burns. And if you find yourself sat there for 10, 15, maybe even 20-minute intervals, it's going to burn, it's going to hurt. But you are going to improve your threshold by doing so. You are going to improve your body's ability to process lactate. It is a useful and very beneficial intensity to be at, but the downside to it is it creates a lot of fatigue. And as a result, you need to be quite careful with how you prescribe this, because it's very easy to get carried away with this kind of work and ended up with burnout, missing sessions. It feels great, it feels good if you like pushing yourself, but we do need to be careful with it. And then finally, I've got zone 5, which is our sprinting and our VO2 max. Anything over threshold is in zone 5. Now, doing VO2 max intervals with heart rate alone can be a bit of an issue because of how much heart rate jumps around and how long it takes heart rate to adjust. If I were to start a 2-minute interval, it may be about a minute into the interval before my heart rate actually hits where I want it to be, because there's always this delay as your body sort of starts to understand the demands made of it. Equally, if I'm riding over a steep hill, chances are my heart rate will start to increase on the descent as it's still catching up from the incline. So there are downsides to heart rate. When we are sort of taking our cycling training quite seriously, most people opt to use a power meter rather than just focusing entirely on a heart rate monitor. Now, a heart rate monitor, this is a cheap piece of equipment which you can get them built into your watch, but I generally recommend against using that. It's really not that accurate. You can get a chest strap that sits around your sort of across your chest. I find that they slip when I use them personally, so I don't tend to use them. You can get optical heart rate monitors that sit around your arm, and these are sort of broadly quite affordable. When you're looking at power meters, however, we do need to get the credit card out. You're looking at these days about £350, so probably about $450, something like that, for a power meter. And this is a physical attachment to your bike. It can be a pedal, it can be a crank arm. Those are the two most popular ones. And as you are riding, it measures how fast it is how hard it is that you're riding. So it looks at a combination of the force that you're pushing the pedals round with and also the speed that you're pedaling. So, and this will do sort of run a calculation, and it'll give you a figure and it'll say, you're working this hard. And you can then use that data to inform your training and your racing. So most people do a fitness test where to set our zones, we will need to find out what our maximum heart rate is for 20 minutes, and we can input that into some software and it can calculate the threshold heart rate for us. Or when you are cycling, if you have a power meter, you probably need to do what's called a ramp test. Now, a ramp test is a test to exhaustion on the bike, where you'll have a warm-up and then it will start to get harder every minute. And you keep going until you can't pedal anymore. If you are only riding outdoors, then you'll probably need to do a 20-minute test instead, which involves riding completely unobstructed as hard as you can for 20 minutes. The downside to this is there are very few places in the world where you can ride hard for 20 minutes without having to, so much as freewheel for anything. But also the fact that it's really hard to gauge that 20-minute effort, especially if you're new to cycling. So the ramp test is what I point most newer cyclists in the direction of. We will then get an FTP, which is our functional threshold power, which we can put again into a calculator online. I recommend Training Peaks is a great way to be able to track all of this. Stick your FTP into Training Peaks and it will calculate your training zones for you, and you will then be able to look at your zones and go, okay, well my zone 2 is between 110 and 145 watts and my zone 3 is from 146 to 155 watts. And you can then, from there you can work out what your targets are going to be during your workouts, during your sessions. This is the foundation of training, is that we are training to numbers, and we need to know what kind of training it is that we're going to be doing and what it is that we're looking to do with that training. Now, as well as sort of targeting zones, we can also do things such as hill reps and sprints and all these that we can add in, which may not be structured with wattage targets. That doesn't mean they're not good training. But for the most part, if we actually really want to be fast on race day, we are going to need to do structured intervals. We're going to be needing to use some kind of zone system to make sure that we're regulating our efforts. If you just go out and you ride your bike a lot, there's a lot to be said for that. But if you are, for instance, trying to set a personal best on all the hills so you can impress people on Strava, if you're fading towards the end, if you haven't really got a clear plan for your cycling, People are going to go past you on race day like you're standing still, and you're going to go, what am I doing wrong? Why is it they're so much faster? Well, it's because they had a structured approach to their cycling. And that, people, is why I have a job, basically. Well, a business, I suppose, equal either or. But the reason is because it's so complicated. There are so many factors to take into consideration, and it's about creating the right program that is going to allow somebody to go past other people on race day like a rocket ship. It's about having the balance of the aerobic fitness, of the muscular endurance, knowing how much time to spend in which zone, how much recovery between intervals, how it is that you approach that entirely to start with. So this is what coaching is, really. It's about me making sure that people don't go too hard too soon. They don't absolutely blow a gasket when they are in their training, when they're in their racing, making sure they pace things well, not letting their ego get in the way. And I spend far more time holding people back than I do pushing them to their absolute limit. So if you have got to the end of this 3-part series and you're thinking, you know what, Simon, that's a lot to take in. Like, there's a lot of information you've just thrown at me. I still got a lot of questions. Well, why don't you work with me? Why don't you drop me an email? My email is down in the show notes. Okay, Simon@Phazon Triathlon. Drop me an email. Just call it training. Say, hi Simon, I was interested in what it is that you have to offer, how it is that you can help me. Because with my time in the bike shop, with all my qualifications in triathlon, in sort of anatomy, strength and conditioning, everything that I have learned, all the nutrition, which I haven't massively touched on today. This is, it takes a huge amount of time and effort to learn all of this. And, I've tried to share it with you as best I can, but I cannot give you specific advice. If you want specific advice on which bike to buy, how much training should you do in this zone, how can we structure this? How can I become more efficient? What gearing should I run? If you've got all of these questions, and if you also want help with your running, with your swim technique, with your nutrition, with injury prevention, with everything that comes with this, because triathlon, it's a bloody complicated sport. I can't think of a single more complicated sport on the planet. And there is a huge, huge amount to learn. And if you want to be efficient with your time, if you don't want to spend hours trawling through YouTube, reading textbooks, trying to learn all this, if you want to be able to say, you know what, Simon knows what he's talking about, I'm going to offset all of this onto him, and I'm going to make sure that he does all the legwork for me, does all the hard work to prepare me for my triathlon. So I can go out there, I can focus on the training, so I'm not wasting time that I could be spending with my family. Not wasting time doing all this research and just be as efficient as I can. My coaching starts from only £15 a week. Now, there are much more expensive options for people who want really premium options, but it starts at £15 a week, £60 a month, okay? £800 a year. In many cases, that's less than you might have paid for your entry, and when you consider all of the other costs associated with an Ironman, travel, accommodation, the bike, pool fees, everything that comes with it, okay? I'm not going to say it's a drop in the ocean, because it's not. But I'd like to think that's money very well spent. So why not drop me an email? If you want to pick my brains, if you want me to help guide you through your journey, get you up to speed with your cycling, which equipment is that you need to buy to take you through every aspect of your training, Simon@Phazon Triathlon, it's down in the show notes. Or if you head to my website, phazontriathlon.com, you have the ability to book a free 15-minute call with me. It's under free triathlon advice, 15-minute discovery call. Book a call with me unilaterally. I'll show up and we can talk about your training. Either way, a big thank you for listening to all 3 episodes of this. If you haven't listened to all 3 episodes of this, please go back and do so, because there's a lot in the other episodes that you will find useful. Thank you so much. I'm going to be back next week where I have an interview episode, and I hope to see you all then.